Just flowing from Gary's last presentation, public service is 57% of complaints. That's around about 550 if my maths did me well. Is that working? When I first walked in the job, I think we were 61%, so we are making some difference, but we've still got some process to go. I will say, of course, not all of those complaints are necessarily successful. So what I thought I'd do, because this is an Auckland audience and they may not have heard about my office, most people in Wellington have heard about my office because I pretty much traipse around talking about myself quite regularly. But for Auckland participants, I thought I might just give you a brief resume of why we were created and then spend most of the time, if I can, about what results we have seen. So that's what I plan to try and progress through today. But if I can take you back to 2012, for those New Zealanders in the room, that was the year of what we like to call the privacy breach across government. So there was a number of material breaches across the public sector, ACC, WINS, EQC, etc. And my boss, Colin McDonald, who was the Government Chief Information Officer, was tasked by the government, who were rightly peeved, or mightily peeved, about these breaches, to see what he could find out. So he undertook a review of publicly accessible information systems across the public service. And I think it's fair to say that he found that performance in both security and privacy was patchy at best. And that the results of his findings were that there was a greater need for the government to focus on the right governance, operational and assurance practices in both security and privacy, and that we needed to get a greater level of executive oversight over this particular domain. In other words, it was lost in the bowels of the organisation and it was a compliance-based exercise at best. What we found over a short period of time when Colin was responsible for that particular program, over about a 12-month period, we moved 27 of agents. When he first started, 27% of agencies had formal security standards and procedures in place. That moved to 96% within about 18 months. So again, once you get a focus on the risk in front of you, once you get the number of complaints in front of you, you can respond to it quite actively. The end result of that review was that the government decided that this was not going to be just a one-time fix program. It needed a cultural change, it needed investment over a long period of time, and so therefore it recommended that we created some enduring functions to provide ongoing guidance and assurance across the sector with appropriate attention to privacy and security practice. So out of that came my office, and out of that came what we call the protective security requirements, which is a group of requirements established by the New Zealand intelligence community to increase the whole security posture of the New Zealand government. So we were established in 2014. Initially, I had a mandate of 40 core public sector agencies, almost all based in Wellington, and in 2015 that was extended to cover all of the DHBs. So we have 20 district health boards around the country who fell under our mandate, under my mandate. To progress that, the first thing that we did was we basically set some core expectations of chief executives. Everybody in this room will know that the Privacy Act has been in place since 1993. Chief executives have had that responsibility for ages, but actually it was a compliance-based exercise that was down the bottom end of their concern processes, so it wasn't really getting the level of attention and focus that it should do. And in an environment where we're increasingly moving into a digital engaged citizenry, we needed to change that model quite a bit. So what I did was I created 10 core expectations of chief executives of agencies or chairs of DHBs, flowing from strategy to program to resources, based on a model that said this is not a one-size-fit arrangement. So a policy agency like, say, the Ministry of Transport has quite a different risk profile of the personal information they hold than, say, the Inland Revenue Department or a district health board. So why would the same program be in place in Ministry of Transport as it would be in a DHB? Clearly it wouldn't. So we basically said to chief executives, it's not our job to determine what that level is, but you should make an overt and deliberate risk assessment of the information that you hold and the practices that you have and the culture of your people to make a difference in some way. We also developed what we call a privacy maturity assessment framework. I think Gary talked about the 4-box matrix that everybody knows about. We went through a cycle where everybody was building a maturity model, so we were right in the game of that one. So we created what we call a privacy maturity assessment framework that supports the agencies to target their programs towards the maturity across multiple gambits. And effectively it looks along those lines. So it's a conventional 5-level maturity model configured across the 9 key areas that we see as quite critical in terms of managing personal information in a practical way. Conscious I'm going to have to go quite fast because I thought I had 30 minutes and I've only got 20, but that's okay. The other core thing so obviously we tried to focus on agencies building their own maturity, but part of what ministers want from me is to provide an assurance that we've made a jot of difference. And just by saying we've reduced our complaints from 61% to 57% probably ain't going to cut the mustard. So what we do is we ask each agency to report annually to us on their performance. So their assessment against the maturity framework that we've established of where are they now, where do they think they're going to be in 12 months and what's their long-term aspiration? And that's really designed to have a conversation at the executive suite level for chief executives to go, I know what I'm doing and I know where I'm going to go and I've got a program which is resourced to achieve that. So it's really designed around that. So 2015 was our first baseline exercise to define what that looks like across that whole 61 agency sector. So the methodology for that reporting process was deliberately a self-assessment. My view is very firmly that if we have a monitoring or auditing process, then poor practice will be hidden within the organisation. Rightly or wrongly, that's just the nature of an audit-based process. So what we really want is a realistic and decent self-assessment by the executive and the agencies themselves about their own appetite. We deliberately put it so that chief executives have to sign off on this. So the very fact that it has at least that level of executive oversight becomes more important, and you do have some chief executives who are A-type personalities who like to beat their colleagues, but we've tried very hard to push them towards that realistic assessment. We've emphasised that if we thought someone was pulling the wool over our eyes, we could go in and check. So we have what we call a verify on demand model. So it's not an audit-based model, it's a self-assessment, but if somebody said to us, that's a bit strange. One agency did that last year, we pushed back and conveniently they reduced their scores to something more realistic. They were pretty much 5 across all of our modes pretty quickly. The results of that we report to the Minister of State Services and multiple other ministers. So what they want to see is maturity growing over a period of time. So the results, have we made a jot of difference? What we've done is we've categorised our agencies into 3 major categories. Category 1s are the big holding agencies that have major transactions, multiple customers. So the people like MSD, IRD, all of those that you would think. The category 2 agencies are those that are more, they hold staff information or a limited amount of personal information. That might be a policy agency like a Ministry of Transport or a Ministry of Defence or something like that. And the 3rd category is the DHBs, which are a special category of their own because they're just a special category of their own. So what we found through this process, and it's hard to read, I know, the documents, but across the 4 things that we were focusing our attention in the first element of our program, which is governance, privacy program, culture and information management, is that we're not where we need to be, but we have an assessment. So for the category 1 agencies, they're all just below the 3 level. Which says they're starting, they've got decent practices in place, but it's probably not embedded across the whole of their organisation yet. So not surprisingly, the smaller agencies don't have a lot of resources available to it, so they're a wee bit less mature. But their aspirations are to move forward. And each of those agencies, I can tell you, has developed a program of work that pushes forward, that tries to push them forward towards those aspirations. Alongside those results, we've also been able to ask a couple of questions in Kiwis Count. So this is a model run by the State Services Commission, which talks to citizens about how does government actually serve their needs across multiple domains. So we've managed to get a couple of questions about privacy in there. So we're still trying to get a long trend line, but there's been, since January 2015, when we first asked this question, we've just got some results. There's been a statistically significant increase in respondents who feel that their personal information is properly protected by government. So from 47 to 54%. So that's still 54% is not where I'd want to be, but it's progressing us forward to where we want to be. Similarly, the number of people who agree the government is doing a better job in managing information than it was previously has moved from 37 to 43%. Again, we're starting that process of gaining or regaining the trust and confidence of our citizenry in the way we manage personal information. Really interesting, when the ACC breach occurred in 2012, public confidence in the way that the management of information by government in New Zealand went through the, I was going to say through the roof, but it went through the floor. It was a significantly noticeable drop in confidence in the way that the government operated. We're going to continue to do this every year, so we'd hope to see that trend line progressing on an ongoing basis. The Commissioner, we always look at the Commissioner's UMR surveys to make sure that we're not doing something that is irrelevant, etc. So our findings are very similar to his findings, that this does matter to citizens, and when it goes wrong, citizens really do care about this. So we think we're in the right space. Our view is that the work that our agencies have done, I won't say my office because my office doesn't do it, it's the agencies that do all the hard work, they do all the heavy lifting. Our view is that their maturity is increasing, that public confidence in the way that they do operate is growing slowly but surely. That my big risk, our big risk, is of course that is a transient beast. The next big breach, we can lose that confidence within moments. So it's a continual battle to continue to focus efforts and resources when we don't have a lot of resources across the government. It's not like we're throwing money at public services in New Zealand. How do we maximise the opportunities that exist? Some of the things that the government is doing is looking at a much more digitally enabled citizenry. And if you have that, then guess what? Information management, information security and privacy are core foundational stones. I think we get that at the conceptual level. What does it mean at the practical level about agencies making a difference with their own practices? So where are we moving forward? So we're going to continue to work with agencies to ensure their ongoing improvements in system capability. We've listened to feedback from agencies, made some changes to the approaches that we deliver, modified our self-assessment process because there were so few questions that were a bit out of kilter, always the way that you first run these things. We've got a baseline and we're going to be trying to test that baseline over a period of time. We've got a particular focus on information management and security across agencies, and we've got a very strong program of work towards DHBs, which distributed across the country, and the resources are we can gain some real value if we join together as the DHBs, I think is the way I would put it. So we're moving forward as much as we possibly can over the next wee while. We're quite proud of the work that our agencies have done, but we know that the story is a continuing one. This is a never-ending journey. So I'm going to leave it there and ask for any questions that people may have.